The man at table 7 thought he was safe. After 11 years, the rhythm of his new life had become a comfortable habit. The bar was his refuge, a place where nobody knew his real name or the blood debt that trailed him from another life. He took a slow sip of his drink, the ice clinking softly. He did not see the man enter. The newcomer moved with a deliberate calm, not the frantic energy of a bar fight. He slid into the seat opposite. The man from table 7 looked up, and in that split second, his entire world collapsed. The recognition was instant and terrifying. The man with the razor leaned forward and spoke a single quiet sentence. This was not a random act of violence. This was a calculated execution, 11 years in the making. To understand why this man had to die in that bar, you need to understand the betrayal that started it all. Before he was a ghost hiding at table 7, Junie Bird was the architect of an empire. In the chaotic, cash-rich world of Harlem's numbers racket, trust was the most valuable currency, and Bird was Bumpy Johnson's vault. The numbers game, the illegal lottery that ran through every neighborhood, was the financial lifeblood of Bumpy's operation. It was a delicate ecosystem of runners, controllers, and bankers, all moving thousands of dollars a day. And Junie Bird was the man who kept the books. His role went far beyond simple accounting. Bird managed the cash flow, knew every debtor and creditor, and understood the intricate web of payouts and collections that kept the entire machine humming. This required a level of trust that was almost unheard of on the streets. Bumpy, a man who trusted few and suspected many, gave Bird the keys to the kingdom. He was Bumpy's financial brain, his most trusted lieutenant. While Bumpy was the public face, the feared and respected Harlem Godfather, Bird was the quiet engine in the back room, the one who made sure the lights stayed on. This partnership was the foundation of Bumpy's power. Publicly, they were untouchable. Their bond was seen as unbreakable, a testament to the idea that loyalty could trump the greed and treachery that consumed so many others in their world. Bumpy's strength was his organization, and Bird was the cornerstone. But that strength created a blind spot. Bumpy's trust in his inner circle was absolute, and absolute trust is the most dangerous vulnerability a man in his position can have. He was preparing for wars with rival gangs and the police, but the real threat was already inside the walls, counting the money. While Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem, a much larger, more organized threat watched from downtown. The 5 families of New York, particularly the Genovese and Lucchese families, viewed Harlem not as an independent kingdom, but as unprotected territory. The Commission, the ruling body of the American Mafia, had grown tired of Bumpy Johnson's independence. He operated outside their control, and that was a problem they intended to solve. Their goal was simple: absorb Harlem's lucrative numbers racket into their own operations. They did not want a partnership, they wanted a takeover. Their strategy was not a frontal assault. They were smarter than that. They initiated a slow, deliberate financial squeeze. They strong-armed Bumpy Johnson's suppliers. They intercepted shipments of the betting slips that were the lifeblood of the policy banks. They made it clear to anyone doing business with Bumpy Johnson that there would be severe consequences. The pressure was designed to be economic, to choke the operation until it gasped for air. They presented Bumpy Johnson with an ultimatum: fall in line under their banner, accepting a subservient role, or be wiped out completely. It was a war of attrition, and the families had near limitless resources. The key to their plan, however, was not force. It was identification. They needed to find the weakest link in Bumpy Johnson's chain of command. They quickly realized that Junie Bird was that link. As the financial architect, Bird was the pressure point. He felt the squeeze more acutely than anyone. He saw the revenue streams drying up. He calculated the losses. He understood the mathematical certainty of their eventual defeat if the pressure continued. Control the money, man, and you control the entire operation. The families made a calculated risk. They decided to turn Bumpy Johnson's most trusted ally, betting that fear and pragmatism would trump loyalty. They began quietly circling Junie Bird, offering him not just a way out, but a way up. The offer to Junie Bird was not just about survival. It was about transformation. The five families dangled the ultimate prize, control of Harlem's entire numbers operation with their protection. They offered him the crown, with the understanding that he would now be a prince answering to a king. For Bird, it was a chance to step out of Bumpy Johnson's shadow. He would no longer be the quiet man in the back room. He would be the boss, insulated by the most powerful criminal organization in the country. They promised legitimacy, or at least a version of it that meant freedom from the constant, grinding street warfare that defined independent operation. The psychology of Bird's decision was a complex mix of greed, fear, and cold calculation. Was it pure ambition, the chance to finally be the one in charge? Or was it the stark, terrifying realization that Bumpy Johnson's ship was sinking, and this was the only lifeboat? The families expertly played on both. They showed him the futility of resisting their power while simultaneously inflating his ego, convincing him that he was the true brains of the operation, the one who deserved to be in charge. The decision to flip was not made in a single dramatic moment. It was a slow erosion, a series of small compromises that carved away his loyalty. It might have started with a casual, off-the-record meeting, just to talk. Then sharing a small, seemingly insignificant piece of information to prove his value. Each step made the next one easier. The families were masters of this process, turning allies into assets one conversation at a time. Bird crossed a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. He made the calculation that his future was safer, more profitable, and more powerful with the established order than with the independent, albeit legendary, Bumpy Johnson. He decided that self-preservation and advancement were worth the price of betrayal. In doing so, he set in motion a chain of events that would end, 11 years later, with a razor at table 7. The first betrayal was quiet, a secret handshake in a shadowy room. But Bumpy Johnson operated on a simple, brutal principle. If you shook his hand with treachery in your heart, he would eventually come to collect what you owed. The trap was set with surgical precision. Junie Bird, now fully committed to his new masters, provided the perfect bait. He informed Bumpy about a major cash counting operation slated for a specific warehouse on a specific night. This was no ordinary count. Bird emphasized the sheer volume of cash representing weeks of Harlem's policy bank earnings. It was a haul significant enough to demand Bumpy's personal presence, both to oversee the count and to symbolically claim the fruits of his empire. Bird sold it as a moment of triumph, a demonstration of their resilience against the five families' pressure. He painted a picture of defiance while laying the groundwork for a surrender. Bumpy, trusting the man who had managed his money for years, walked into the warehouse with confidence. It was a routine he had followed countless times. The location was chosen by Bird for its tactical vulnerability, a single entrance, limited escape routes, perfect for a clean, contained raid. The timing was coordinated down to the minute. Bird knew exactly when the cash would be spread across the tables, providing the most damning visual evidence for the authorities. He had given the 5 families, who in turn coordinated with compliant figures in the police department, a perfect script. While Bumpy oversaw the counting of his own empire's wealth, Bird was across town providing the final confirmation that the target was in position. The doors burst open, not with the chaotic energy of a rival gang, but with the cold, methodical force of a planned police operation. The room froze. Bumpy's men looked from the drawn police guns to their boss, awaiting a command. But Bumpy's eyes were not on the police. They were scanning the room not for an escape route, but for an explanation. And in that instant, he found it. He saw the absence. Junie Bird was not there. The man who had insisted on this location at this time was conspicuously missing. The realization hit Bumpy with a physical force. This wasn't bad luck. This was a calculation. The betrayal wasn't just about money or power. It was a personal, profound violation of a bond he had believed was sacred. The cuffs clicked shut on his wrists, but his mind was already racing, shifting from king to prisoner, from businessman to strategist, plotting a revenge that would take more than a decade to fulfill. The legal case against Bumpy Johnson was a masterpiece of underworld engineering. The violent crimes, the assaults, and the intimidation were difficult to prove in court. The 5 families and their allies knew this, so they attacked where he was most vulnerable, his finances. The charge was tax evasion. It was clean, simple, and historically effective. The government didn't need to prove he was a gangster. They just needed to prove he had a massive unexplained income that he didn't report. And for that, they had the ultimate witness. Junie Bird took the stand as the star witness for the prosecution. Bird's testimony was devastating. He laid out the entire financial architecture of Bumpy's empire in meticulous detail. He produced ledgers, described cash flows, and named names. He was the insider who could connect the dots from the street-level policy slips to the cash counted in the warehouse. On the stand, he was calm, precise, and utterly convincing. He had been there. He had seen it all. He was the architect testifying against the king. The entire case hinged on his credibility, and he performed flawlessly, painting a picture of Bumpy as the sole mastermind of a vast criminal enterprise. Throughout the trial, Bumpy sat perfectly still. He didn't react with anger or outbursts. He simply watched Bird, his gaze a cold, calculating stare that seemed to absorb every word, every gesture. It wasn't the look of a defeated man. It was the look of a strategist studying his opponent's moves. He understood that this courtroom was just another battlefield, and Bird had already won this particular skirmish. There was no point in fighting a lost cause. The sentence was handed down, 11 years. Not an ordinary prison, but Alcatraz, the Rock. For a man of Bumpy's age and stature, an 11-year sentence in the country's most notorious prison was effectively a life sentence. It was designed to be the end of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. As Bumpy was led away, Junie Bird disappeared from public view. He was swallowed by the nascent Witness Protection Program, given a new identity, and relocated to a different part of the country. The 5 families had upheld their end of the bargain. Bird had his freedom and his new life, paid for with the life of his former friend. He likely believed the story was over. He had traded Harlem's treacherous streets for anonymity, and Bumpy was locked away on a concrete island, surrounded by ocean and armed guards. The account was settled. But Junie Bird made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that prison walls could contain a man's will. He did not understand that for Bumpy Johnson, Alcatraz was not a cage. It was a library, a communications hub, and a command center. The clock on the 11-year sentence had started ticking, and with every second that passed, Bumpy was not idly waiting for release. He was meticulously planning the final chapter that would bring him to Table 7. For ordinary men, Alcatraz was a cage designed to break the spirit. For Bumpy Johnson, it became a university of vengeance. He did not just serve his time, he weaponized it. While other inmates marked days on a calendar, Bumpy was building a new kind of network. The prison's strict isolation was a myth to him. He cultivated informants among the guards, men who, for a price or out of sheer fascination with the Harlem legend, would carry messages. He communicated with trusted lieutenants on the outside through coded letters that discussed family or business in language only they understood. The flow of information never stopped. He knew more about the shifting allegiances on the streets of Harlem from his cell than most men did walking them. His primary intelligence target was Junie Bird. The task was monumental, finding a man who had been erased by the federal government. But Bumpy understood that no disappearance is perfect. People need to live. They develop patterns. They get comfortable. Through his network, he began piecing together fragments. A rumor from a contact in the marshal's service, a slip of the tongue from a corrupt official on the family's payroll. He learned the region where Bird had been relocated. Then, the city. The patience he displayed was inhuman. He was not just waiting for release. He was conducting a forensic investigation from 3,000 miles away, building a profile of his target's new life with the meticulous care of an archivist. This 11-year period was also a masterclass in reputation management. Bumpy ensured that his name still commanded fear and respect from behind bars. Stories of his calm authority inside Alcatraz circulated back to Harlem. He handled disputes between inmates with a fairness that reinforced his legend. The message was clear. Bumpy Johnson was still a power, even imprisoned. This served a dual purpose. It maintained the loyalty of those who would be crucial upon his return, and it sent a chilling message to anyone who might have considered him finished. They were not just waiting for a man to get out of prison, they were waiting for a king to return to his throne. Every day he spent on the rock was not a day lost. It was a day his legend grew, and a day closer to the final accounting. As the end of his sentence drew near, Bumpy's planning shifted from intelligence gathering to active preparation. The coded messages to his most trusted enforcers became more frequent and more specific. He was not just asking for information anymore, he was giving orders. Financial preparations were paramount. He needed clean, untraceable cash to fund the operation. Money was moved through front businesses, funneled into a war chest dedicated to a single, precise objective. This was not about rebuilding his empire on day one. It was about financing the one piece of business that had to be settled before any other. His intelligence network had done its job. They had identified Bird's habits, his routines, his vulnerabilities. They knew where he shopped, where he drank, the route he drove to work. They knew he had developed a false sense of security, a belief that after a decade, he was truly free. Bumpy understood the psychology of his prey. The most dangerous moment for a hunted man is when he finally believes the hunt is over. That is when he gets sloppy. That is when he becomes predictable. Bumpy's team began a campaign of psychological warfare. A car would sit idly outside Bird's home for just a moment too long. A wrong number phone call would ask for him by his old Harlem nickname. These were subtle touches, designed not to scare him into hiding, but to fray his nerves, to make him paranoid, to ensure he was looking over his shoulder constantly, questioning every shadow. The final chess moves involved the selection of the weapon and the venue. A razor was chosen. It was silent, personal, and carried immense symbolic weight. A weapon of the street, not a soldier's tool. The location was selected for maximum impact. A public place. A private assassination could be covered up, explained away. A public execution sent a message that could not be ignored. The decision was made to strike at Table 7 in Bird's favorite bar. It was a place where he felt safe, where his guard was down. The approach would be calm, professional, and inevitable. There would be no dramatic chase, no messy shootout. It would be a meeting. A final conversation between a man and the consequence of his choices, 11 years delayed. Every detail was scrutinized, every variable accounted for. Bumpy was not just planning a murder. He was staging a lesson for the entire underworld on the immutable price of betrayal. The gates of the federal penitentiary swung open, and Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stepped back into the world a free man. There was no fanfare, no parade. He was met by a single, trusted driver in a nondescript car. But his return to Harlem was anything but quiet. The news traveled through the streets faster than any newspaper could print it. The king was back. His first stop was not a business meeting or a celebration. It was a slow, deliberate drive through his old territory, a symbolic reclamation. He needed to be seen. He needed every corner boy, every shop owner, every rival, and every ally to know that the 11-year interruption was over. The landscape had changed, with new faces and new operations, but the fundamental rules of power had not. His first orders, issued from the back of that car, were not about rebuilding his empire or counting his losses. They were about settling accounts. Before a single dollar was collected, before a single territory was negotiated, the ledger from 1952 had to be balanced. The message was clear and immediate to his inner circle. Business would resume, but first, there was a matter of honor. This was not just about revenge. It was about re-establishing the foundational principle of his authority. Loyalty was the currency that mattered most, and the interest on a debt of betrayal had been compounding for over a decade. By making this his absolute priority, Bumpy sent a shockwave through the underworld. He was not a relic hoping to reclaim past glory. He was a force of nature reasserting the natural order. The clock that Junie Bird thought had stopped 11 years ago suddenly started ticking again, louder and more ominously than ever before. The operation to find Junie Bird shifted from a passive intelligence-gathering mission to an active, relentless hunt. Bumpy's team, now funded and directed with precision, descended upon the city where Bird had been hiding. This was not a frantic search. It was a methodical stalking operation, conducted with the patience of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. For 11 months, they watched. They documented Bird's new life in exhaustive detail. They knew his work schedule at the small accounting firm he now used as a cover. They knew he went to the same diner every Tuesday for meatloaf. They knew he frequented a quiet neighborhood bar, always sitting at the same booth, table 7, where he would nurse 2 bourbons before heading home to his wife and the sterile safety of his suburban existence. The surveillance was designed to be felt, not just executed. This was a key part of Bumpy's psychological strategy. They allowed Bird to glimpse them. A man reading a newspaper would be there too often. The same car would pass his house at odd hours. The goal was to erode his sense of security, to transform his sanctuary into a gilded cage. They wanted him paranoid, looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows. A man consumed by fear makes mistakes. He becomes predictable as he seeks the comfort of routine. And Bird, despite his fear, was a creature of habit. He did not run. Perhaps he thought it was a test from the marshals. Perhaps he believed that after all this time, moving would only make him more visible. Or perhaps a part of him knew that running was futile. The hunter had his scent. The final decision on the when and where of the execution was a calculated one. A private hit at his home could be messy, emotional, and send a weaker message. An abduction would be complicated and risky. Bumpy wanted a public statement. He chose the bar, and specifically, table 7. It was the place Bird felt most comfortable, his fortress of false normalcy. Striking there would demonstrate an absolute breach of his safety. The date was set. The team confirmed Bird's pattern. He would be there that night. The final piece of intelligence was the confirmation that he would be alone. Every variable was locked in. The 11-month stalk was over. The hunt was culminating in a single, inevitable moment. The team moved into position, their movements calm and rehearsed. They were not assassins in a hurry. They were instruments of a delayed justice, finally arriving to collect a debt that had been owed for 4,015 days. The man at table 7 ordered his second bourbon, completely unaware that the last 11 years of his life had merely been the quiet before the storm. The man with the razor didn't rush. He entered the bar with the calm demeanor of someone meeting an old friend. He walked directly to table 7 and slid into the booth opposite Junie Bird. Bird looked up, his face initially showing mild annoyance at the intrusion, then confusion, and finally, a dawning, gut-wrenching terror. The years fell away in an instant. He wasn't looking at a stranger. He was looking at a ghost from Harlem, a face from Bumpy's inner circle he hadn't seen in over a decade. The man leaned forward, his voice low and conversational, meant for Bird's ears only. He didn't state his business. He stated a fact. Bumpy sends his regards. Those 4 words were the sentence. They confirmed that this wasn't a random act of violence or a robbery. This was a message, delivered personally. Bird had no time to plead, no time to offer a deal. The razor came out in a fluid, practiced motion. It wasn't a wild slash. It was a precise, efficient cut across the throat, deep and silent. The attack was over in seconds. The man stood up, wiped the blade clean on a napkin, and walked out of the bar with the same unnerving calm with which he had entered. He left behind no struggle, no loud confrontation, just a man bleeding out in a booth, the quiet gurgle of a life ending the only sound. The other patrons, slow to process what had just happened in plain sight, only realized the horror when Bird slumped forward, his second bourbon untouched, the ice still melting. The execution was a masterpiece of underworld efficiency, brutal, personal, and designed to be understood by everyone who heard about it. News of the hit at Table 7 spread through the underworld not as a crime, but as a strategic communique. The precision of the execution was what stunned the 5 families. This wasn't the work of a hot-headed thug. It was the work of a master strategist. They had assumed Bumpy would return broken or desperate to reclaim his turf through brute force. Instead, his first act was a surgical strike that demonstrated 3 terrifying qualities: immense patience, flawless intelligence gathering, and an unwavering commitment to a principle. The message was crystal clear: betray Bumpy Johnson, and no amount of time or federal protection can save you. Your debt never expires. In Harlem, the effect was electric. Bumpy's authority was instantly re-established, not through a war, but through a single, undeniable act. The legend of the Harlem Godfather was cemented. He wasn't just a powerful gangster, he was an elemental force. His power was no longer just about controlling streets, it was about controlling time itself. He had waited 11 years to balance the scales, proving that his memory was long and his sense of justice was absolute. For his allies, it was a reassurance of fierce loyalty rewarded. For his enemies, it was a warning of consequences that were inevitable. The 5 families, for all their power, were forced to acknowledge a hard truth. They could negotiate with Bumpy. They could war with Bumpy. But they could never again make the mistake of believing they had broken him. Some lines, once crossed, demanded a permanent response. The hit at Table 7 was that response, an example that would be studied and feared for generations. It taught a lesson more valuable than any territory. The most dangerous man is not the one with the most guns, but the one who is willing to wait as long as it takes. Bumpy's 11-year calculation proved that in his world, justice wasn't swift, but it was certain. The price of betrayal wasn't just death, it was the terrifying knowledge that it would find you, no matter how long it took or how far you ran. That single act of retribution cemented a reputation built on the power of inevitable consequences, a lesson that echoes through history.